Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, literature, the arts, and more. I am Ito Utini.
And I'm Micaiah Utini, and today we're speaking with David Crespy. David is a playwright, biographer, and scholar. He's a founding co-director of Mizzou's Writing for Performance program and has been instrumental in establishing many other programs, including the Missouri Playwrights Workshop, the Mizzou New Play Series, and Summer Reps Comedy in Concert series. His latest projects include a late-career biography of the playwright Edward F. Albee, whom he considered a colleague and friend. We're excited to be with him today. First-time listeners, welcome. We're glad you're here. We're building a community of writers and artists from all walks of life, and since you're with us on this journey, we'd appreciate if you would like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and spread the word. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, or a guest you want us to bring on, please let us know, and for more free resources, check out the Datekeepers blog at thedatekeepers.com/blog. Thank you.
David, thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to have you. Can you please tell us about yourself?
Yes, I'm David Crespy. I am a professor of theater at the University of Missouri. I've been teaching here for 27 years. I basically run the dramatic writing program at Mizzou, but I also have taught acting here for years and direct shows here. And of course, I have a background as a theater scholar and currently working on a biography of a late career biography of Edward Albee. Albee is the 3-time Pulitzer Prize-winning author of the very famous play, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? He, of course, was thought of as the American absurdist, along with Harold Pinter and Samuel Beckett, with whom he was very close. He was also very close with Harold Pinter and Eugene Ionesco and Fernando Arrabal. So he was a unique playwright in that he wrote in a decidedly experimental, challenging way, and I had the great pleasure of working with him personally over the many years that I worked with him. I basically worked with him from 1993 till just a little bit before his passing in 2014, 2015. He died in 2016, and he was very kind to write the foreword to 2 of my books. One of them was Off-Broadway Explosion, which is a book about the Off-Broadway movement in New York City in the 1960s. And then he also wrote the foreword to my book about his producer, whose name was Richard Barr. That book is called Richard Barr, the Playwright's Producer. And Edward, with his producers, Richard Barr and Clint Wilder, founded an important playwrights workshop called the Playwrights Unit back in the 60s. It was down in the Village off of 6th Avenue. And I wrote my dissertation about that and got to meet Edward back then and developed a very strong friendship with him, but I was not alone, and many scholars had a strong working relationship with Edward because it's frankly how he survived, the American theater and the neglect of the American theater. The biography that I'm writing is about the end of his career. It's about his remarkable resurgence because of his third Pulitzer Prize-winning play, called 3 Tall Women, which was a play about his mother. And it's typical of his plays. It has both very realistic elements, very naturalistic elements, and then it has very, very non-realistic elements where you enter the interior of this dying elderly woman and see her thoughts from 3 different ages. So, and the interesting thing about Edward was that, he was pretty much written off as a has-been from the 1960s. 1983, he brought a play called The Man Who Had 3 Arms to Broadway, and by that point, his relationship with the New York theater critics was not good. And Frank Rich, a New York Times theater critic, who had the nickname of the Butcher of Broadway, basically attacked the play, attacked Edward, and Edward Albee's career as a Broadway playwright ended at that moment for a good 10 years. And he was pretty much persona non grata in the United States, in the New York theater in particular. And he made a tactical retreat into the regional theater, into the university theater, and brought his plays to Europe. He brought them to the English Theater of Vienna and created a strategy for survival. He was maybe the most peripatetic playwright in American theater history, and he also did something that is very remarkable, which is that he created a foundation with his profits from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf back in 1962 to create this Edward Albee Foundation and the William Flanagan Creative Persons Center out in Montauk, which exists to this day. And Edward really rebuilt his career by extraordinary generosity. He just made himself available to everyone, including me, who, when I met him at the time, I was a graduate student at the CUNY Graduate Center. So I was just very, very lucky to have this really wonderful relationship with Mr. Albee, and the book is really dedicated to his memory and to the work that he did to support visual artists and writers at his foundation and really across his career. It's a labor of love.
You know, when people do something that they are passionate about and they love, it's clear. We're so grateful. We actually were at Edward Albee Foundation last year. We went there to work on a novel, and it's run by wonderful people, very professional, very caring. It's a wonderful place.
Yeah, it was really cool to get to see how his legacy is continuing on even now after his passing and all the hard work that the people in Montauk are doing to keep it going. But yeah, can you also tell us a bit about your theatrical work and the plays that you've written?
So I have been writing plays for many, many years since high school. I think one of the reasons why I was so attracted to Edward Albee's work and why I became a mentor is that I've always been a kind of a weirdo, and I'm very much in love with the absurdist playwrights, with the playwrights of the 60s who had a profound effect on me, even though I certainly love Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller and William Inge and Thornton Wilder, but I'm generally a decidedly non-linear playwright. In the last few years, since 2018, I have been writing plays that deal specifically with my Sephardic heritage in Greece. So my grandparents were from Thessaloniki in Greece, and I did two Fulbrights, one to Greece and another to Spain and Greece, to dig into this Sephardic heritage. And I've written about 10 different plays that deal with various aspects of this Jewish community. This was a thriving Jewish community, one of the largest Jewish communities in Europe. At this height, practically the entire town was Jewish. The port closed for the Jewish Sabbath, even though it was in Greece. And unfortunately, the community was almost entirely exterminated during the German occupation by the Nazis. And most of the community was sent to Auschwitz, including my great uncle, Saul Masarano. And so I've done a lot of research into this community. It had a thriving Ladino, Judeo-Espanol culture, which has been remarkably preserved through the efforts of the Jewish Museum and the Jewish community of Thessaloniki. And so they've been an incredible resource for my research. And of course, my next Fulbright that I plan to do will be in Italy, because my grandmother's family were actually Italian Jews who had Sephardic background who settled in Greece. So they lived in Greece, spoke Spanish, and had Italian background. So it come from this kind of complex Mediterranean background, at least on my dad's side. I grew up with, my father speaking to my grandmother in Ladino. Of course, he didn't teach us the language because he thought it was a ghetto language and he wanted us to be American. So what a terrible loss, this process of assimilation. But it was very odd because my mother's family were, of course, typical Ashkenazim Russian Jews. Half of her family were Orthodox Jews and the other half were anarchists, and which is kind of typical for Ashkenazim. And my dad's family It was weird. It was a weird mix of Greek and Spanish. My grandmother would listen to Rebetiko. She would, listen to Greek music, make essentially Greek food, but she called it by Spanish names. So I grew up with huevos on tomate, y queso, and borrecas, Yiddish keftedes, and, all these Sephardic dishes, Nina's, Passover. Anyway, my background, it was a little schizophrenic because, on the one side I had this mother from an Eastern European side. And then when we went to Philadelphia, which is where my father's family are, where there's still a large Sephardic community, it was like, going to Greece, where the women would go out to the taverna and dance, which scandalized my mother. And my dad's family were, they were all teamsters and truck drivers and salt of the earth, and had probably come from similar backgrounds back in Greece, where they were, Thessaloniki was known for its port workers. And so I assume I came from that kind of a background, although I think the Nasarano family in Thessaloniki were probably furniture makers, as far as we can tell. So I've written about different aspects of that. And in terms of reading something, I brought a play that I had written and a little scene. It's a play called Yenikamji, El Extasis de Sabbatai Tzvi, and it's a play about the false messiah of the 18th century, Sabbatai Tzvi, who was a remarkable figure who managed to capture the imaginations of many, many Jews all across Europe. He was quite a phenomenon, and people were swept up in messianic fever. And it's very likely, at least according to Gershon Shalem, who wrote the most kind of extensive biography of Sabbatai Tzvi, that he was very likely severely mentally ill, brilliant, and mesmerizing. And he basically turned the Jewish world upside down. So the Yenikamji is the name of the Dunmei Mosque in Thessaloniki, because Sabbatai Tzvi had a particularly large following in Thessaloniki. It's really where the birth of the Dunmei movement took place. And the Yenikamji is fascinating because when you go to visit it, it's one of the only mosques left in Thessaloniki. And from the outside, it's clearly a kind of a modern mosque. The style of it is quite interesting. I believe it was designed actually by Saul Moliano, the Sephardic Jewish-Italian architect that lived in Thessaloniki. So it's quite unique. But on the outside, it looks Muslim. On the inside, it is Jewish. There's a lot of Jewish stars. And the reason for this is that Sabbatai Tzvi caused so many problems that he was captured and brought to the Caliph in Constantinople and was put before the Grand Caliph. And the Caliph said, okay, Mr. Miracle Worker, Mr. Messiah, show me some tricks. And, I'll give you an option. You can either have my archers shoot 800 arrows into your body. You can deflect it with your messianic skin, or you could convert to Islam. And of course, Sabbatai Tzvi's response was Allah Akbar. And he converted to Islam, and all his followers converted to Islam, and they became what's known as the Dunmei, who are a very persecuted group of people. Particularly, they were persecuted in Turkey. But then they were, of course, all forced to leave Thessaloniki during the 1920s as part of the big exchange of populations between Christians and Muslims in Turkey and Greece. So the play that I wrote deals with this subject because, in fact, I find much of Sabbatai's story kind of ridiculous and funny, even though other aspects of it are quite mystical, because he was a follower of the Kabbalah, he was a mystic, and, of course, he was quite mad. And in this one scene that I'll read to you, it's a scene between one of Sabbatai's followers and a guard who is about to transfer Sabbatai Tzvi to prison under the Sultan. And so the scene begins with Sabbatai. There's three characters, Sabbatai Tzvi, Yankini, who is an apostle of Sabbatai Tzvi, and Dibaton, who is the gendarme who is having to deal with this very strange prophet. Sabbatai starts the scene with, okay, no reason to be such a cranky panky-poo. Yakini, who is the follower. I dreamt that Sabbatai Tzvi is the Messiah. I dreamt it as clear as day. I will tell you my dream, Rabbi Dibaton. And De Botton responds, perhaps at a later time. The gendarme outside the temple await the transfer of Rabbi Haisri to the next ship to Cairo. Yakini, I will tell you my dream. De Botton, yes, a little dream. Yakini, once I dreamt that a camel was pursuing me from one room to another. Even though I locked the door with a complicated lock, the camel burst the lock and chased me further until at last he found me in a room at the seaside. I was no longer afraid of the camel. Then a beautiful maiden came forth, embraced and kissed me and begged me not to forget her, as I was to marry a queen. The queen was, at present, covered by the moon, and the moon covered by the sun, so that the queen whom I would marry would emerge from between the two. I swore the desired oath, and I thought that I also had to have intercourse with her. De Botton, Rabbi, are you sure you want to continue? Yakinis, Sabbatai has assured me that sensuality is accepted in the Messianic age, which has arrived. I will continue. De Botton, I'm sure you will. And that's the end of that little scene.
You said you have another one. Can you tell us
Yes.
about it and read?
So this other play we just read, it's just been published in Plant Magazine, which is a journal, an online journal, which has just been started to feature nothing but full-length plays, which is very, very rare. And they published this play of mine called Bad French. Bad French is in an entirely different absurdist mode. It is a play that is built on a dream within a dream within a dream. And in the play, there are four characters. One is Wild, who is this little child, ghostly child, who we believe is one of the unknown children of Oscar Wilde. And the other is a very strange flying plesiosaur whose name is Loch Ness, and Loch Ness is portrayed by a puppet on stage and has a large telescoping neck that he likes to wrap around his victims. And there's two characters, Lou and Sam, who we don't entirely know who they are because they keep changing. And throughout much of the play, it seems that they may be a kind of S&M prostitute couple, but they go out into the world and beat and cut people for their pleasure, for both their customers' pleasure and their own pleasure. So they're actually quite a dastardly couple. And yet, as the play evolves, we discover more and more about them to the point where we're no longer quite sure if they are who they are because we're no longer sure what world we're in. It follows a particularly dreamlike structure. And that's because I have been obsessed with my own dreams for years and years and years. I, unfortunately or fortunately, remember all my dreams and can recount them, and they plague me day and night, and they quite often become my plays. And so, and I actually teach a technique called dream work for dramatic writing, which incorporates these techniques that I developed through the ideas of a performance theorist by the name of Bert O. States, who wrote many plays about the phenomenology of dreaming and fiction. So this is a scene in the play where Lou and Sam, who have discovered that they're beset with these strange ghost-like characters of Wild and this ghost-like flying plesiosaur named Loch Ness, they have woken up from one of the dreams, and in this dream, Sam believes that he's a professor, and Lou believes that he is the professor's graduate student. And Sam believes that he has a lecture that he has to do on Delacroix's painting of Sardanapalus. And so he tries to do his lecture, even though he's quite mad. So this is that scene. The characters are Lou and Sam. Sam says, "It was a dream. I would never cut someone with a knife. I would not." Lou, tell me again about the painting. Sam, the brooding bored monarch with a rather rambunctious beard oversees the systematic murder of all his odalisques, stabbed repeatedly by his servants as he reclines on a scarlet pyre, his excesses displayed before him as he prepares for his own suicide. Sardanapalus, the Asiatic despot, rather than face an insurrection by his disgruntled people, instead commands the destruction of all he possesses, an extension of his insatiable appetites. A Byronic hero, his brow furrowed, yet unbothered, casually observes a black eunuch plunging his sword into his royal steed. Aisha, his Bactrian bride, hangs herself, and Balia, the king's cupbearer, is in the process of pouring oil on the dead. A pyre is about to be set afire. All is chaos, blood and opulence, pouring pageantry and eroticism into a bedlam of riotous color. And what can compare, what can come close to this level of hedonistic savagery and surrender, as nude bodies are ritually sacrificed to this last Assyrian king? And Lou goes, "Oh." And Sam continues, "And what casual onlooker can resist the tide of this tumultuous spilling of blood? What voyeur can refuse this sumptuous slaughter of innocent creatures swimming in an opulent crimson sea of rubies, diamonds, sapphire, and gold?" And Lou says, "Not me." And that's the end of that scene.
Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you for the reading.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I love it.
You mentioned earlier, you alluded to the neglect of the American theater. Do you feel that American theater still is in a state of neglect? And if not, why not? And if so, what do you think can be done about it?
Well, I mean, we are unique in developed countries and the United States. The commercial pressure of producing is really barely mitigated by the not-for-profit world. And of course, the not-for-profit and for-profit world of the theater was really, really dealt a crippling blow by the pandemic. And while Broadway mostly has come back, it's still incredibly challenging. The costs are so high. The training of the American theater artists is in severe doubt because, at least at public universities, and this is something we're experiencing ourselves at the University of Missouri, the funding scheme has changed so that we are now being funded only 30% by the state and 70% by tuition. And this actually goes directly opposite to how the university was founded to exist. And this is true of most state universities. It was supposed to be mostly through the state, 70% state and 30% tuition. So the challenge is, of course, if you're going to college and you're going to walk away now from a public university owing about $150,000 for a 4-year undergraduate degree, you're not going to major in theater. So we're facing a pinch from both sides. The question is, can we get to a place where we're willing to pay for the art that we desire? Because remember, at least in the playwriting world, many of the wonderful new films and screenplays and teleplays that we're seeing that have arrived through this era of peak television, which is slowing down a little bit, a lot of those writers were plucked from playwriting programs because as playwrights we're taught to think differently. We have traditions of experimental writing and technique that we tend to think out of the box, which is exactly what Hollywood needs. So I think that it's important to remember that the theater really, really is an incubator for a lot of the more commercial work that is done. And so I think there has to be a change in the paradigm on how we support the arts because, well, maybe if the government's not willing to take care of this, maybe there should be more funding and scholarships and support through the commercial fields because the video games that kids play, the writers who write those video games are also quite often playwrights and writers, and that's hugely lucrative. So I would say it would be a very interesting choice to start looking to the commercial world, which wants our ideas and our work and our techniques, which, by the way, AI is not very good at. It's trying, but we're still better than AI. And so it's important that we find a new paradigm for supporting the arts if we have decided as a culture, and this is particularly true in American culture, that we need to find a new way to support the arts because they feed us. The arts feed us.
And you mentioned also that Edward Albee, partway through his career, had to adapt an entirely different professional strategy in order to survive. What are the professional strategies that you are deploying to keep getting your work out there so that you can make your career sustainable and continue reaching the audiences that you want to reach?
We have to support each other. We have to create pockets of oases for ourselves to work. And for me, back in the day, I founded the Waterfront Ensemble in Hoboken, New Jersey, which was a writers group. And every Tuesday night, because we would have that night off, a lot of us had that night off, we would get together and do our work. And Edward did a very similar thing with his Playwrights unit. He tried to create a sanctuary for writers where they could hear their work, be inspired. And that remains my technique. I created the Missouri Playwrights Workshop here at the University of Missouri. And every Tuesday night, we meet and we read new work right off of our computers to each other. Sometimes we invite actors. But that is one of the most fundamental strategies of survival. As long as we can get together and support each other's work and listen to it. And quite often with the Missouri Playwrights Workshop, we've moved to doing things via Zoom. And guess what? Plays read beautifully on Zoom. It's a little bit like, Mercury Theater on the Air with Orson Welles. We treat the Writers' Workshop a little bit like our Sabbath, and we keep that day of the week holy for our creativity and writing. It takes a regimen of agreeing that we're going to protect this time for our writing so we can hear each other's work and have a deadline to keep writing and keep working. So that's how Edward affected me primarily.
Well, that's why we started the podcast. A couple of years ago, we were looking for podcasts like this that bring writers and artists together and connect them with audience, and we couldn't find anything. So here we are.
It's wonderful, and I really am very grateful to both of you for allowing me to come on.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you.
Agreed. Thank you so much, David. We enjoyed having you.
My pleasure. Thank you.